I could have my facial expressions and everything. But thank you so much for being here today. Today, we're going to kind of dig into and unpack thinking about how to set yourself up for success in social work in whatever that means for you. We have a wonderful guest alum that I can't wait for you to meet that will provide us some insights on their social work journey. And then, of course, I'm going to let you know what you can expect from our office. So yeah, let's get right into it. So that is my face. That's me, Sooah, on the left. I'm the Associate Director again in the Office of Career and Professional Development. We have Terry, who's a fellow student of yours who is interning in our office. And then we have the wonderful Grace. You might have met her at orientation at different points, who's our admin aide. So together we make up the CPD team in our office, and I hope you'll engage with us throughout the year. Just a little bit about our office. I'm going to go into our programs and resources at the end of this session, but just a little bit about us. We do a number of things. We do workshops, events, career coaching, and much more. But really the goal of our office is really quite simple, and that's to prepare the best career-ready social workers in the field, right? So we're really committed to supporting you in whatever it takes for you to be successful, right, in the field. But first, I kind of wanted to pose that question back to all of you, because I don't want to define what success means to you, right? And I also want to acknowledge that the concept or the word success can maybe bring up a lot for some people, right? For some of us, we have a very clear vision of what this means. For others, maybe it's less clear. For others, maybe we've internalized messages from others on what we think this should mean, right? And for others, this word might feel really steeped in like white heteropatriarchal norms, right? So I really kind of want to take a minute to really reflect for yourself and really think about what success in this profession, what success at Silver would truly, truly look like for you. And when you're ready, if you're comfortable, I would love if we could get some responses to these questions in the chat. All right, so what would it mean for you to be successful at Silver in social work in this profession? All right, so I see a response in the chat already. So establishing strong network of support inside and outside of Silver, being gainfully employed, love that. Passing licensure after graduating, wonderful goals, I love those. A private practice with full schedule of happy clients, love that. Yes, build a strong educational background to feel, sorry, I don't know, call me open up my own practice, getting a job working with veterans. Awesome. I love all of these goals and visions that you have for yourself. Oh, comfy to open up my own practice. Excellent. All right. Would anyone else like to share what your vision of success is at Silver or in this profession? Feeling like I have the competence and skill to effectively serve my clients. Yes, absolutely. That's a big part. All right, we got a retweet. Wonderful. Feeling alignment between my values and my career. That's a really lovely one. I think that's really, really crucial and important. All right. Lots of people agree with that one. That's excellent. All right. Anyone else would like to share anything else? All right. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for sharing and being open and vulnerable to sharing your visions of success with us. So now that we've kind of reflected a little bit on what success means to us, I kind of want to dig into what it means to set ourselves up to foster that success, right? So we've invited a very, very special guest today who was in your place not too long ago and is going to provide us with some insights by sharing her social work journey with us, right? So Patrice has the most stellar bio I've ever seen that I'm going to paste in the chat. I'm not going to read it all, but I highly encourage you all to read it. Give me 1 second. Having all these technical difficulties today. All right. Not pasting. All right. I'm so sorry, but I will get that in the chat as soon as I can. They are currently the director of the Criminalized Survivors Program of Steps to End Family Violence, as well as a subject matter expert with the Love Project in the Office of Violence Against Women. And Patrice is a ton of things, but one thing I want to share is that they are also one of 2 of our amazing inaugural alums in residence, which is a program we're piloting this year, where Silver alums will be engaging with the Silver community in lots of different ways to really assess and address the needs of particular student profiles. So for example, Patrice is going to be working to assess and address the needs of Black identified students here at Silver, by meeting with different community members, student groups, engaging in programming, having open office hours and career coaching appointments, really with the goal of institutionalizing support systems for these students, right? So you'll definitely see Patrice around, and she'll be available to the community very, very soon. More information on how to reach her will be coming. So please feel free to reach out and connect when it does. But we are so lucky to have her in conversation today. Thank you, Patrice, so much for being with us. So yeah, I kind of wanted to start off by letting you introduce yourself and add anything else that you wanted to share about yourself with everyone and kind of ground yourself in this space.
Hi, everybody. I know I saw some of y'all yesterday, but thank you for having me here. I will say it's very hard to go after Dr. James. He is just that good. And he was once my professor for a few classes. So he's a hard act to follow. But hi, everyone. I'm Patrice James. Pronouns again, she, her, they, them. I think Sooah pretty much said it all, but I'm just happy to be reintroduced back into the Silver community and happy to answer any questions that y'all have. As someone who is a recent alumni and has been in the field for a few years and able to just bridge any sort of connections or transparency that folks may need and any insight or wisdom that I can share, I would be happy to do that. So happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Patrice.
Of course.
All right. So the first question I'm going to ask, and we're just going to kind of have a conversation with each other today. So can you talk a little bit about your career journey and kind of how it has evolved over time? Are you where you thought you would be when you were a student?
Strangely enough, yes. I didn't think, part of me thought I would be in a totally different direction because my original interest when I started at Silver, and I was in the extended program, FYI for folks, I was in the 3-year program. I was really interested in substance use, but I think it started to pivot when, also this is also in the culture of like New Jim Crow just came out. A lot of people are talking about mass incarceration, hyper criminalization. And I think my interest started to pivot to criminal legal systems and more forensic social work. But at that time, there weren't courses that extended to that. There were no courses specifically around that, even before Dr. James even came on. So I found myself kind of in a little bit of a rock and a hard place trying to figure out, like, I'm feeling called, I'm feeling pulled to be in more criminal legal systems work, not having any legal sort of internships yet, because in my first year it was just courses, and in my last 2 years it was internships. But definitely was able to sort of break through with that and starting in immigration. So my first year field placement was at an immigration advocacy agency, specifically working with survivors of violence, particularly DV and GBV, gender-based violence, and helping them with asylum applications, deportation sort of interviews, check-ins, things like that. And that's when I started to see the connection between gender-based violence and criminalization, which is a large part of the work I do today in spearheading the Criminalized Survivors Program at Steps to End Family Violence and my work with the Love Project. So that then pivoted to working in human trafficking courts through the Center of Court Innovation and really seeing and assessing that women and LGBTQ identified folks are experiencing violence a lot differently and are also not being engaged in criminal legal systems as they should be, and are obviously, as we know, overrepresented in criminal legal systems and often under-resourced. And that's sort of where it just started to grow. And I've been with Steps to End Family Violence for the past 3 going on 4 years, starting as a clinical advocate in a particular program where that funding has closed, and now spearheading and co-directing the program with someone else, where we are supervising brand new social workers and we're very much building social workers from the ground up to be able to properly support criminalized survivors of violence who are gender-based violence survivors, who are typically Black and Brown, LGBTQ, and come from a lot of underrepresented communities. So that's sort of how it kind of started. But I'm not surprised that I'm in that place, because I think I've always been interested in gender-based violence and anti-violence work, and this sort of opened up because the program within Steps to End Family Violence is the only program in the nation that actually supports criminalized survivors of violence. There's not a lot of overlap in anti-violence work with working with people who experience criminalization. That's anywhere from incarceration, arraignment, all the way to, or conviction, arrest, all the way to incarceration, conviction. And I think that being that this is the only program in the nation that does this kind of work is incredibly powerful. So it's definitely what keeps me here, and I think maintains my, what I call like North Star, like what keeps me aligned to doing my work, is that particularly with this area of anti-violence work, there is no national tracking system for survivors of violence who have experienced sexual violence, physical violence, financial violence, or other forms of abuse and power and control who are criminalized. There's no national tracking system for that. So there's many, many millions of more women and LGBTQ folks who are experiencing the duality of those things that are not getting programmatic support. So the work with STEPS and also the work with the Love Project through the Office of Violence Against Women kind of answer to both of those things. And one is citywide specific, which is STEPS, and the other one is a nationally federally funded program.
Wow. I'm speechless. I don't even know how to respond to that. You're doing such amazing, amazing work. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. Yeah, doing the work. So social work is such a broad field, and there's so many things you can do with your degree, right? So what advice would you give for students who may want to explore different pathways, right? But still kind of balance being like planful and strategic kind of with the limited time they have here at Silver?
I would say what could be, I think, most helpful is continuing to build connection. I think I'll say that a lot throughout this panel. I think it's really important to not spread yourself super thin, because that's never healthy or helpful, but sort of spread your interest kind of, because as I was saying, I was really interested in substance use and then kind of pivoted to gender-based violence work and then added the criminalization and immigration piece off to it, because as I think we all know, when you're dealing with social issues, it all has overlap. It rarely is anything very individualized. There's always going to be overlap and layers to injustice, right? And I think you're definitely going to see that as being a student. So I would continue to build those relationships with faculty, with other students. I think if there's a specific niche interest, do not downplay yourself and act like that niche interest isn't something that can come into full fruition as support, right? Thinking about wanting more of a presence for criminalization studies even, right? And like the history of that. And I'm so grateful that Dr. James has even come to Silver, because I remember like begging for that to be a thing, and now it is a thing. If you have particular niche interests that you want to be more fully fledged out, if you want more community around those things, I would start to build it and build that community and ask faculty and other students, are these other things that you may be interested in, you know? Starting even with like info sessions, if you're specifically interested in something, to sort of just spread your interest out and sort of try to field people to come into that and see what can build from there. Because I'm a big proponent of, if you build it, they will come. You're not the only person who's probably interested in a particular thing. And I think there are other people who kind of hold their breath and say, well, I may be, interested in this, but like, oh, it's probably stupid. No one else is probably interested. And you would be surprised. And I think that's a good way to be able to explore different pathways of things. And as again, you'll see that there's overlap. So you'll see that there's other students that may be interested in that and maybe are thinking of things that you haven't, right? We all come with an inherent wisdom. I truly believe that, and can help you build up an idea that you're thinking of. So that's something I would definitely say.
Wow. Yes, wonderful insight. That's absolutely super important. Building your peer networks. Yeah, absolutely.
It's super, it's important. And I would also just add with that to getting connected to other organizations, not just sort of like student groups, because those are amazing and helpful. And student groups have definitely saved me in my time at Silver, both building them and being a part of them, but getting connected to other sort of communities, even outside of Silver, and bringing your Silver presence there, right? I'm thinking about my time at the NYU Leadership Institute and being like a fellow through SSLD. I was one of the few social work fellows that they've ever had. All the other fellows were from Tisch and from Stern and Steinhardt. And how do you sort of bring, I think, the principles of social work to outside of that? I wasn't SSLD. I was cohort 4, I think, way back then. But I think about that, like even my time at SSLD was just a social sector leadership development fellowship. They didn't have Silver students. It was such an underrepresented population, but social workers are everywhere, right? So how can you sort of branch out even beyond Silver and sometimes beyond NYU, thinking about NASW, right? National Association of Social Workers. I was a liaison one year for NASW, NYC, and Silver to bridge that connection. I was a fellow at the Council of Social Work Education, right, which is a national organization that helps develop social work education programs. How can we have silver presence and have your own presence and maintain those connections so you can build up what direction you want to go in? Because if you have, I think, that inherent community and that network, it's better able for you to sort of create, you know, what I call your North Star and your direction and how it aligns with what you may want to do. And even if it pivots and changes, that's okay too.
Yeah, that's really lovely. Yeah, I think sometimes we forget that we're in this wonderful, wonderful city with such diversity and so many people outside of our little bubble of NYU, right? So taking full advantage of that, and all the organizations, all the other schools, all the, you know, other social workers that are out there. I think that's really, really great insight. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that. So I'm going to shift a little bit, and someone mentioned this earlier, but one theme that often comes up when I talk with a lot of students is the theme of feeling kind of competent and confident enough as a social worker, right? So can you talk about how you cultivate confidence as a social worker and in your practice, and how you kind of came to really build your social worker identity?
Yeah, that's a big one. And I
Mhm.
feel like in all transparency, there's never one tight, like bow present answer on that. I think what has helped me continue to build my confidence as a social worker is just reminding myself that, again, I say this all the time, and folks who come across me again will just hear me repeat this over and over, is that we do all come with that inherent wisdom. And I don't want people to downplay or deny your lived experience is your inherent wisdom. And I think we often we forget that because we're in rooms with big players and fancy titles, and someone's a director of this and of this and that. And I think that that's something that Dr. James talked about a lot when I was a student that I really loved. Like, they're a professor and they're like, yeah, just call me like my name, right? And I think it's just kind of things like that, this idea that your positionality isn't the totality of who you are, right? I'm a field instruction lecturer at Columbia University. And when I'm supervising social work students there who are at my agency, they always feel like they don't know enough because they're not yet an MSW. And then they feel like they don't know enough because they're not an L, and then they're not a C, and then they're not a DSW, and they're not a PhD. And then the goalpost kind of keeps moving. Like, you will eventually maybe get to, if that's your goal and where you want to be, but the goalpost, I think, is just constantly moving, which creates this air of imposter syndrome and people feeling like, if I haven't read all the books about trauma and all the foundational things about every evidence-based practice, I don't know anything. I have had staff that I supervise and students that I supervise say the same thing. And I think what's important to remember is that, one, you always have inherent wisdom as someone with a lived experience because you bring that to your work. I think my approach as a supervisor and a director when supervising both clinicians, other types of therapists, behavioral health people, students, is just to remind them that, like, you learned a lot before you even got to me, and I'm not a person with all the answers. Yes, I have fancy titles and have accomplished a lot of things, but I'm always learning from my own students. I'm always learning from my own staff who have been in places that I haven't. And I think it's an important thing to remind yourself that inherent wisdom that we all have. And I think remembering to find people and keeping that sort of that hub of community around you who can support you and validate you. Because I think we often feel very alone in these things. And we often feel like, you know, we're always in, like, I think, a culture of competition too. Like, this idea that, like, I have this, but then this person has that. And we're always looking at somebody else's plate. And I think it's important to remind yourself to be patient, right? I know that people say that all the time, but to really be patient with yourself, that you're on your own timeline. You're not on anybody else's timeline. You don't have to immediately, like, get a doctorate because someone else got a doctorate right after grad school, unless that's something that you want. I think getting really internal with yourself and asking yourself, what do you want and what is alignment for you? And I think that's what boosts your confidence, because if you're constantly trying to chase what the other person is doing, that's not in alignment with what you want to do. You may not want to immediately go to doctoral school right after, and that's okay. You may not even want your C, and that's okay. Some people don't want their L, and that's okay, right? I think it's about encouraging people to go with the direction that they want and what longevity and sustainability feels like for them. Like, I think it's all about sustainability because social workers are everywhere, and that's really wonderful. And it's also a long game. A lot of us have been in the field for many, many, many years. And I think we have to sort of align ourselves with what does sustainability look like for us, and what are the miniature steps for yourself. That's something I definitely had to ask myself, like, me as Patrice, as a social work student doing all these things, why am I doing them, right? That big why, and how is this sustainable for me? Does this align with my vision down the line, or is this something I want to pivot on and change? Am I taking this on or saying yes to this project because it's expected of me or because somebody else is doing it and I'm trying to compete? Right. I think that those are things that you have to ask yourself in order to get to a place of feeling confident, because confidence is also sometimes comfortability. At first, you know, you don't want to be comfortable all the time because you may never grow, but it's, you want to be able to get to a baseline where you feel comfortable where you are so you can build on your confidence from there, if that makes sense.
So much sense. That's the best answer I've heard in such a long time. There's so much
It's true.
wisdom and
I think you have
treasures
to,
in there. Oh my goodness.
yeah,
I
you have
don't
to
even know where to
yourself,
start.
like, you can't compare yourself to what other people are doing, you know.
Right.
And if you are doing that at all, let that be an inspiration for what you want to do and not a competition for what you want to do. I think that that's really the distinctive part, because we're all doing amazing things, and everybody in this Zoom room and everyone at Silver is going to do amazing things. So I don't think it's, competition is very much an act of self-violence. And I think we have to remind ourselves of that every time we're like looking over and seeing what somebody else is doing. Let it inspire you and not put you in a place of like envy, you know, because we're all going to do amazing things anyway. We are all competent to do all of those amazing things that we want to do. It's just about getting in line with what you want to do.
Absolutely. We're all gonna win. I love that.
We're all gonna win, for real.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's, like, scarcity mindset is real. And I think it's very much, it comes from a lot of different places, but I think in order to partially decolonize that in the South is letting go of that scarcity mindset. There's room for everybody to eat.
Always.
Every day, all the time. So I think it's just about kind of reminding yourself of that. And I think those are gems that will carry on into your practice in different areas where you grow and where you go even, so.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Oh, I love this. Okay. I'm gonna shift a little bit. I really, really appreciate that answer. So thank you so much. To your time and experience when you were at Silver. You talked a little bit about the groups and networks and places that you were part of, but are there any resources or opportunities that exist at Silver or at NYU or New York City that you kind of utilize as a student that students can be thinking about or taking advantage of?
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely say at my time, just Wasserman was super helpful, Center for Career and Professional Development. And I'm sure for Silver students now, CPD is super, super helpful. I was a part of a leadership board for graduate students who, there was one leader for every sort of schools. There was like one for Tisch, one for Stern, one for Steinhardt, one for Gallatin, one for Silver, et cetera. And we all got together on a monthly basis and kind of talked about, it was kind of a liaison, and like talked about what were some of the career professional development needs that Silver students wanted, for instance, and then bringing that back to Wasserman and trying to develop initiatives out of that. And I found that to be super helpful. We were able to, through those connections and through my time as a NASW liaison as a student, to get NASW presence in Silver a little bit more. So like folks from NASW NYC had actually come together to sort of bridge that gap, right? They're like, you want professional development, career, this and that. This is how we can help you with that. I found that to be incredibly affirming and helpful. And these are also connections that students can make now, network connections that can carry on throughout their career. Like, I'm still very connected to folks at NASW. And even if you wanted to do some professional development things in NASW or CSWE, that could be super duper helpful. Those are some of the main things I'm thinking of. Definitely staying in contact with people at NYU Communications, like Christine and Laura, and student affairs. Like Courtney was so instrumental and helpful in, and I think our development with student groups. I have to very much credit Courtney there. Thinking a lot about areas where you can, again, create your own networks. When I co-founded the Black Women's Social Work Coalition with other amazing student leaders, that very much came out of a space of, this doesn't exist yet and we need it, right? So if you're feeling that, yes. If you're feeling that calling and you're just like, there's a thing that doesn't exist here, how can we get it? And we got a lot of support from faculty, a lot of support from faculty. I remember Courtney being super excited to support us with anything that we needed. So I definitely think in terms of networks or opportunities, if there's any sort of state too, like going beyond New York City and going to statewide and national coalitions of social work that are more than willing to get other social work students together, I think utilizing your time as a student, if you have the capacity to make those connections, are helpful. So definitely Council of Social Work Education, National Association of Social Work, both the city and statewide chapters. There's a statewide clinical social work group, I believe. I'm forgetting the name of them, but if those are just sort of areas that you want to be in, Also like radical social work collectives for some social workers who don't want to be a part of those institutions. They're creating their own thing. So I think that all that is helpful in terms of networking and opportunities.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, look up all those places that Patrice just named. Super, super valuable. Yeah, networking is super important. 70 to 85% of jobs are secured through networking. So yeah, next question. So looking back now as a professional, is there anything like you wish you would have known as a student?
That's such a hard question. Um, I guess something I said similarly, so I'm a bit all over the place, but just don't limit yourself. Like if you have, I mean, be mindful of your own capacity and your boundaries, but don't limit your interests. Don't feel like you have to be pigeonholed. You know, social workers are everywhere. Like anytime I'm introducing myself to someone and they ask, what do you do? Like sometimes I don't even know where to start. I'm like, I do this and then I do this. But a lot of times I just start with saying I'm a social worker. And then they say like, oh, y'all are in schools. And I'm like, and we're in jails and we're on native reservations and we are everywhere. We are everywhere. So I think you shouldn't limit yourself in your interests. Like find that coalition building, find that community, because I'm a person who's, I mean, I think it might be a little obvious, but like I'm super ambitious. And sometimes I have to slow myself down and be like, your plate is overflowing. But I think part of that comes from the drive of wanting to make change. And I'm in spaces with people who want to also do those things. So I think just reminding yourself of that fire within you and letting it lead you to a place where I think where your interests and your action and your fire can all align with themselves. That's something I would say. Don't pigeonhole yourself into feeling like, well, you know, I'm interested in palliative care studies, but I may be interested in this other thing. Like, see if you can do both or all, you know, if you have the capacity and the boundaries. Because I've also heard a lot of recent alums sometimes, not just from Silver, but from other social work schools in the city say, I really wish I would have like done this or taken this class, you know, and sometimes it's them not knowing about it because you can miss a lot of things in your emails, of course. But sometimes it's also just about asking questions. Like I used to ask a lot of professors, like, what are your interests outside of this class? Like, are you doing other things that I may be interested in and like, you know, coalition build with that. So don't limit yourself is what I would say.
Love that. All right. Wonderful. Excellent. So kind of shifting again. So what are some important career skills students should be preparing for while they're a student? Whether that's like hard skills or soft skills, what are some things that you feel like you use in your everyday?
I would say, I mean, obviously outside of like resume building and cover letter things, I would say building skills around research. I think sometimes a lot of people don't know how much they're interested in research until they get into practice. And then they realize like a lot of this doesn't make sense and it doesn't align with whatever the organization's mission or goal is. I would say if you're interested in research, like conducting it, needs-based assessments, things like that, to get more interested in that. I know math is not everybody's favorite subject, which makes all the sense, and I empathize. But I think if you're definitely interested in that, it can be very foundational to inform how you do work going forward. Research is definitely a part of my work that I do with the Love Project, where we are trying to assess what are the needs that gender-based survivors who are incarcerated or not are experiencing, what did they not get, and how can we inform DV and sexual assault advocates across the country to be able to better support gender-based violence survivors, no matter where they are in terms of their criminal legal involvement. And I think a large part of that is research, right? Like whether it's needs assessments, whether it's surveys, whether it's just literally conducting the nuts and bolts of science and math. I would definitely encourage people to do that if they're interested and not shy away from that, because research informs practice and vice versa. I would definitely say facilitation skills. I know that people have, people sometimes scared and have challenges with public speaking, but I would lean into that uncomfortability if you do have that. I think it's something that you only get better at as the more you do it. And not just for presentations, but also for like psychoeducational and clinical groups, right? Like trying to have those facilitation skills that can carry you beyond those spaces. So you're able to, I think, effectively communicate your points. I think sometimes we can hide behind other people who are doing that or who are better at that, but definitely get comfortable with the uncomfortability of facilitating. And especially thinking about my work in like anti-violence and like violence interruption and criminalization interruption work, thinking about how you can develop, I think, which sounds a little strange, but like bystander intervention development, right? Like how can you step in as, because we as social workers, we're learning about the ways that historically people have been caused harm. Like you're going to be working with client populations who have experienced a varieties of harm, whether it's due to racism, anti-Blackness, white supremacy, poverty, right, immigration, et cetera. And I think how can you be the best advocate you can be is partially through learning how to intervene at different points, right? We not only want to be reactive, but we want to be proactive. We want to interrupt things before they even fully fledge out. I think it's important to be able to develop those skills and knowing how to interrupt harm when you see it. And it's something that can even start in the classroom and it can carry yourself throughout your career. I would also say political advocacy skills. I do think that obviously there's a lot of students that are interested in a lot of different causes, and you don't have to wait until you graduate to get involved in those causes. You can develop both, as you know, a lot of people are trying to be clinicians and it's a very clinical program, but also what political advocacy skills can you get connected with? What can you learn more about? And how can those causes even inform your practice and what you want to do? You know, for instance, if you're interested in, like I'm very interested in, and I work in domestic violence and gender-based violence work and anti-violence work as a whole, I got involved in a lot of DV advocacy groups when I was still a student. Not necessarily in Silver, but some other outside organizations, because I knew that this had piqued my interest and I wanted to learn more. And I think that's how you can develop some political advocacy skills too. So there's like kind of the basic ones like resume and cover letter, but also, you know, how can you show up as a better advocate and a more radical advocate for the communities that you want to support when you graduate? It might be helpful to start now, I think.
Wonderful. I love that all the skills that you just named aren't maybe necessarily what people would think of as professional development, right? But I think we really need to kind of shift and expand our mind around what professional development looks like, right? And the skills that we need to gain, to be the very best career-ready social worker we can be, right? Wonderful. Can you think of the best piece of career advice you've ever been given?
Oh, oh, that's heavy. I guess I'll say one that aligns mostly to me, because again, as it's very clear, alignment is important to me. It was very simple, and it's something I actually hear all the time, so I know that it rings true and resonates with people, but I think it's to just begin. Again, like I said before, I think there's a lot of prep work that people feel like they need, and in some areas and in some spaces, absolutely, but I think to just begin, right, and just to start the work and understand that you're fumbling towards repair, to quote Miriam Kaba, an amazing abolitionist organizer. We are all fumbling towards repair, right? We're never gonna get it right the first time, anytime, and we don't need to seek perfection. Sometimes you just need to do it, and sometimes done is better than perfect, I think. That's something I definitely say to a lot of my student interns who I supervise. Like they always feel like I need to read the whole CBT book to understand CBT in order to do CBT. There's a reminder of like a lot of what you're doing in your practice, in your classes, you're already doing it. Like you don't necessarily always need a manual to feel competent or confident to do the work. Sometimes you just need to begin and recognize like it's not going to be perfect every time, but you're doing it. And I think as we continue to give ourselves a lot more a community of self-compassion, like real self-compassion, like Dr. James was talking about, you'll be a little bit more kinder to yourself if you do make mistakes and you mess up. I know that people are a little obviously scared and worried because you're working with clients, you're working with other people, and you don't want to disappoint them. But I think if we all just in general in life have a better culture of self-compassion and humility with each other, I think we'll be able to make mistakes better. You know, we'll be able to like, you know, sometimes you're going to ride your bike and you're going to scrape your knees when you fall. And I also think that that's okay. So that's the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, because I was very much a recent student and a recent graduate feeling like if I don't do all these things correctly, I'm going to be a failure and no one's going to want to hire me. And that just isn't true, right? That isn't true. And I think you have to be able to understand that you're a human. I know we say it to each other all the time, but it's for a reason. We're human. We're not meant to be robots. And I don't think we do our best work trying to be perfectionists, you know. I think we do our best work when we become as honest people who are trying to work together towards a goal and give each other that sense of self-compassion, humility that I think we all deserve. Because nobody's perfect. No one from history, no activist or mentor is perfect. And I would never claim to be a perfect person. I'm fumbling towards repair like everybody else. So that would be my best piece of advice is to just start and know that obviously like part of white supremacy is moving the goalpost all the time and feeling like if I don't have this, I can't do this and etc. And that just isn't true. And I think part of that work too, and advice to anybody here is to decolonize that from your thinking.
Wow, love that. So much wisdom, so much insight here. But I think that transitions really well into kind of our last question. Something that's so important to kind of setting yourself up for success, no matter how you define it, is kind of how you care and advocate for yourself, right? So how do you practice self-care, boundary setting, and preventing burnout in this work, especially in relation to the identities you hold? I know that's a big question as well, but
I know we're all talking about self-care all day, day, every. I think.
What is your take?
I think pushing back a little bit and not necessarily saying self-care, but self-preservation, because that's an ongoing process, I think, to exist in this world and do this work. I mean, I think the past like 2.5 years or so, going on 3 years with this pandemic, has shown us how much self-preservation is, I think, necessary for survival, right? Like quoting Audre Lorde, she talked about that all the time, that self-preservation is an act of survival. So for me, obviously it looks like the very basic ways, like retail therapy and candles, and I'm going to cook myself dinner. But I think the hard part is like staying in community, even when I feel like I want to dispose of others, to be honest. Like, I think we definitely are trying to, again, fumble towards repair around how do we sort of call each other in and hold each other in and not want to dispose of each other. And I think that's part of self-care, is pushing back on this idea that nobody actually is disposable. And that we all owe it to each other to show up for each other. And that's hard, because there are going to be days where I feel like I'm, very mad at a particular person for doing this particular thing and causing, this particular other community harm, and having to remember, again, like I said before, that, we're all human, and we have to have, I think, humility to be able to be sustainable in this work. And we have to have self-compassion to be able to be sustainable in this work. So a large part of my self-preservation is reminding myself that, like, it sounds so corny, but it's true. Like, we're all human on this globe and on this earth. And I think we're not always in the best of circumstances and positions, I think, to be our best selves. So to be kind to yourself, and I think have a lot of patience. And I think also to respect your own bandwidth. Like, don't play yourself. If you know you can't take on a certain project or do a certain thing, say that. And don't necessarily think about, who am I disappointing? Similar to what Dr. James was talking about before, like, who am I disappointing? Who am I not? Sort of hold whatever standard I'm holding myself to, like trying to let go of that, to remember that we all have very full plates while still being people, right? I hold a very full plate while still having to be a woman in a world that's patriarchal, and to be Black in a world that's white supremacist. And that's already a full plate on its own, right? And adding in other identities that people may hold that are really important to them in a world that doesn't want you to exist. So I think that's a huge part of it, is like saying no and respecting your bandwidth and falling back on your community when you need it. Like, there's many times where I'm not having the best day and I have to call a friend who understands just what I'm going through, and that feels restorative and that feels rejuvenating to me. So I think that those are some of those things. I think the best thing with preventing burnout is, again, just, you have to be able to say no. Like, you don't have to say yes to everything all the time. There's a lot of things that I say no to a lot, because I know that I'm not going to show up as my full self if I say yes to this. I know that I can't facilitate this training. I know that I can't join this initiative right now. So I'm not, and also too, we don't want to take on everything, again, from a scarcity mindset and feel like other people can't get shine. Like, everybody can eat here. Everybody can shine here. There's no need for a scarcity mindset. And again, I think if you pay attention and redirect to your own intuition and your alignment, you'll know that certain things are maybe not for you. And it's okay to say no to those opportunities, because that can open up a door for somebody else. And I think that that's the most important thing with preventing burnout and sort of that act of self-preservation, is just reminding myself that we are all human on this earth. And thanks, Courtney. That was something I definitely wanted, that felt aligning to me, to rejoin the NYU community. Yeah, I'm so grateful to be here. So thank you, everyone.
Wow. I'm like furiously taking notes. I want to write things on my walls. Wow. Yeah, so I kind of, is there any last things you would like to share with the students, with the community that we're in today, before I open it up to questions from the audience?
again, it sounds kind of corny, but like, I just really believe in yourself. Like, not to sound like an after school special, but I think, again, imposter syndrome is something that comes up in my organizations all the time. Like, we're always talking and thinking about imposter syndrome. And it reminds me of, it's not a quote, but I remember Maya Angelou saying something like, I have big imposter syndrome. And she said, I feel like someday someone's going to walk in here and say that everything I ever accomplished was fake. And I think that completely like clicked my brain to a different dimension. Because I was like, if Maya Angelou in her greatness feels like she is in imposter syndrome and that she is not as great as she is, I was like, we are all completely downplaying ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think just constantly reminding yourself that you know a lot more than you think you do. And again, you don't have to have everything in order and everything in line to begin the work, whatever the work is for you.
Amazing. Yeah, love that. Thank you so much, Patrice. You were phenomenal. I'm so happy you are with us and you're going to be with us. And yes, I'm going to open it up to anyone who would like to ask any questions. For Patrice, you can type it in the chat. You can unmute your mic, whatever feels most accessible to you.
And thank you for all the sweet things in the chat. I can't see everything, but thank you very much.
Yes, a lot of love in the chat. Yeah, any questions?
Yes, Patrice, are you taking on mentees? I'm professionally shooting my shot because I have so much admiration for you. And I didn't know as an SLC that I would be asking, but yes, I'm here. You don't have to tell me. If it's a no, don't tell me in front of everyone.
I can say yes to that. I can absolutely say yes to that. And part of my role with the alumni and residence position is to do sort of career coaching, student drop-in hours. I'm still developing those times, but when they are fully developed, I'll share with the NYU Silver community because I want to be a resource to people. Again, I don't believe that any knowledge should be hidden. I think everything should be transparent because that's how we all win. So as soon as I have those, I'll share them out. And then people can come in for virtual drop-in hours for any questions or any support that you need.
I love that. Thank you.
Of course.
Other questions, thoughts, comments, conversations you want to enter?
I have a question. So you said this very beautifully, this idea of believing that, like, not respecting your own bandwidth, but also talking about imposter syndrome. And I'm wondering, how do you navigate believing that you can do more than you can, but not doing that to protect your sanity and your mental health?
Okay. Believing I'm sorry, I just want to rephrase. Believing that I can't, like, that I have like my own limits, like my own capacity, is what you're asking?
Yeah, so for instance, you talked about being like a woman of color and the different intersectionalities between that. So how do you navigate not wanting to fight all the fights, but also like protecting yourself?
Oh Lord, I feel like I'm not the person to answer that because sometimes I am fighting all the fights. I think part of it too is reminding myself that I'm not the first one to do a lot of this stuff, right? Like, I am, and you all are here, building off of generations of work and labor. And I think sometimes we put all of the sort of weight on our own shoulders. And I have to remember, even with the initiatives and all the things that I'm involved in, I'm not the first, like, you know, I'm probably not even like the first Patrice James, right, to ever like approach these things. So I think part of it is recognizing, like, that's the importance of community. You have to have somebody tap in when you need to tap out. You can't do it all on your own. And I think for me as a person, as a social worker, as someone who is like very always considered like high achieving, and people sort of putting that position on me as well, and being a Black woman specifically, you feel like you have to hold it all. And I've very much abandoned that. I think I had to really do the internal work to recognize, like, it's not my job to hold the world. It's on the world to hold the world, really. And even though I do want to fight all the fights, I think it's about when I know I can tap in and when I can tap out. And I can't even, I guess, properly tell you like what sort of prompts me to do that. I think the things in terms of guidelines that reminds me to tap out is when I'm recognizing, like, how many people are already kind of doing this thing? Do I know people who are already doing these things? Do I like trust the people who are doing these things too? So I know that I don't always have to be involved. How do I limit my own interaction with a certain like fight or project or initiative, right? If I know I can come in and drop in some like advice and some wisdom sharing with folks and that's it versus taking on a whole project, I think it's about seeing who else is involved in these things and seeing how much do you really want to be involved? Like how much is your capacity? Sometimes I actually have to literally look at my own calendar and I have to say, okay, you are in back-to-back meetings from 9 to 7. You actually can't be involved in that thing. Like sometimes you have to trick your own brain and do like psychological tricks to remember like, oh, they meet every Wednesday. There's no way I can do that, as opposed to trying to like push it around to make space for it. If there's other people I know and trust who are involved in those initiatives, and again, when you have that hub in that community, like I'm so grateful to have, I know that I don't have to take it on because there's another excellent, brilliant person doing that work too. So sometimes I have to literally look at my own schedule and say, you don't have time for that. Like, and asking upfront when you're introduced to opportunities, what's the commitment, right? Giving people, asking people, I think a lot more like, what is the expectation? How long is this thing? How, if it's about a particular project or something that's related to a cause, really asking about timeline, right? So you can assess your own capacity too. That's one of the first questions I always ask, like, what is being expected of me? Who else is involved? Is there capacity or compensation for other people? If it's a thing of we need you to meet like every week from 5 to 8, I'm like, I actually can't do that. I'm sorry, I have other commitments. So those are some of like the tips and tricks that I do. And I think also when you're, again, in a great place of intuition with yourself, is this aligning with what I want to do, right? Or maybe it is a great cause, but they're not going about it the way that I maybe think it should be gone about, right? Like asking yourself those questions, having like a mental checklist, like an alignment checklist or something around, is this something I really want to do? Do I have the time for it? Who else is involved? What is sort of their projection for this initiative? What's going to happen? Like certain things like that. Obviously tailor it and language it in the way that makes most sense to you as an individual. But that's something that I have developed with any new thing that comes my way that people ask me to be a part of or that I'm interested. And also recommending that things go in cycles, right? You're on your own timeline. You don't have to be on anybody else's timeline. So for me, if there's a certain initiative that I've stopped or is completed or a goal that I've achieved, I will then maybe pick something else up in replacement of that. And also factoring in breaks. Like I give myself a mini sabbatical, like for like a month, a tiny, tiny sabbatical for a month, and say I'm stopping all work and all other things to take care of myself in this time and like fully show up for myself, where morning, evening, afternoon, it's all about me and my family and my loved ones. So those may be some things to think of, like developing your own like alignment checklist and your own capacity checklist.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Of course. I just made that up. So I feel like it'll work. I just made that up. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yes, I love that.
And Patrice, you bring that up, and it goes back to what you said earlier, is about asking oneself the why again and again and again. And so why am I either feeling I'm not worthy in that moment, or take on one opportunity versus the next? Is it the fear of failing? Is it the fear of succeeding that then may bring on further sort of issues of am I worthy? And so it's always asking that why, and like you said, looking at and we have access to so much that we have not before in terms of how things have been done, how they align with the values. So I really, really appreciate sort of what you shared there. And again, keep asking ourselves the why and the why, should we or should we not take on an opportunity or explore something that could manifest so many other things for us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think really just trusting yourself. Like there's a lot of things I've wanted to be involved in. And I was like, I don't have the capacity for this right now. But I was like, if it comes back around and I have a little more wiggle room, I will join. And I also think too, something I might not have mentioned, with the different things that you're involved in. And as someone said, like the different fights you want to fight, I get a lot of energy from those fights. Like I wake up like that fire or that anger, that propels me. That is my gasoline to keep going a lot of the times. Like it sounds a bit strange, but because I work in gender-based violence a lot, I wake up often, not all the time, like I'll meditate and stuff, but like when I really start my day, I'll wake up and get oriented and start to think about all these different things that are happening to client populations, to people I support. And that I think back to a time of like a severe injustice, and I swear, like it gives me the gasoline to keep going for the day. Like I often think about I was an expert witness in a trial for a client. And I had to sit there for 2 hours and explain to a prosecutor why a gender-based violence survivor is still a survivor, even if they don't check off your stereotypical boxes of what a DV survivor is. And I remember how angry I was during that expert witness testimony because he didn't want to believe me. And his entire position was predicated on not believing this survivor to try to throw out anything that was ever, I think, related to her being like a good person. He was very much painting her as a terrible human being. And I remember how angry I was and thinking about, I don't want that to happen again to anybody else that I'm supporting. And thankfully we're able to like win the case, and my expert witness testimony really helped with that. But I think about how that's happening all across the country every day to survivors everywhere in my particular line of work. And that actually is the propellant for me to keep going. So a lot of times I'll harness my anger and my rage in a way that helps me sort of frame my sustainability too, if that makes sense. Because sometimes, you know, you do have to tap out and tap in, as I mentioned, but I can't really describe it, but it kind of just helps me get to a place where that is my fuel, like that is my food for the rest of the day, of like, how can I outlook and find more areas where other gender-based violence survivors do not have to experience what my client experienced on that day. So I hope that that makes sense. Sometimes fighting those fights is also reminding, like, as you're asking yourself the why and sort of what is your North Star to keep going, reminding yourself of, a lot of times it's a culmination of individual stories and individual narratives of client populations, if you choose to work with them, that continues to, you know, sort of supplement that fire that you have to support those communities.
Amazing. Patrice, you were so wonderful. You've been so generous with your insights and your wisdom, and just everything that you've shared has just, you know, resonated with so many people here. And we really appreciate just you and your work and just who you are. And so thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I have like 1 minute to kind of close out. But can we just give some love to Patrice, please, for being with us today?
I can drop my
around.
folks.
Sorry, go ahead.
I can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And while you do that, we don't have time for this, but definitely think of this as homework. So just think about what's one next kind of action step you can commit to set yourself up for success, based on hearing today's conversation. And we would love to know if you have the time, maybe you could email us or message us, but how can our office really support your success during your time here at Silver? And just some resources. I don't think this is gonna work. I'm having all these technical difficulties today. Oh, it's working. Okay, so here's a whole bunch of resources. I don't think I'll be able to go through them all, but definitely check these out when you have the time. Our website, our career readiness and professional development guide has everything you ever need to know about our office and all the resources that we provide. Definitely check out the Wasserman Center and Handshake and make a profile if you haven't yet. And as for our office, we do programs, we do events, we do career coaching appointments, and a number of virtual resources as well. We have a bi-weekly newsletter where we highlight like job opportunities, and that's the best way to stay updated with all of our resources, events and programs that will be coming out, and that automatically gets sent to your inbox every other Sunday. Our first event of the semester will be a networking event that's open to the whole community. It's going to be on February 9th from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you'll have the opportunity to speed network, and we're asking people to bring a resource that's been helpful to them in some way. So it'll kind of be like a little resource like potluck. So everyone will leave with a wealth of resources that has been communally shared. All right, so we hope you can join us. And again, updates will be on our newsletter and our Instagram. But thank you all so much for hanging in with us. You can email us at any time with comments, with questions, to make appointments, and you can follow us on Instagram again to stay up to date with all of our resources and programs. Thank you, Patrice, again. Thank you to all of you for staying engaged. Again, I'm so sorry about my camera. I dressed up cute today. I have lipstick on, and I'm so sad I couldn't be present with all of you. But hopefully I'll see all of you and connect with all of you again soon.